Okay, a couple of small details I just want to chuck in here too. Notice that Laura Dern emerges from the pitch black darkness, and at first you think something scary is going to come out of the shadows, and then it's this like pretty blonde girl in a pink dress. Notice that that's the same thing in Rear Window when Grace Kelly emerges from the shadows, and you think it's something scary, and then it turns out to be the most beautiful woman in the world. Um, there's all these odd, interesting touches. Like I mentioned, violence just around the corner. Um, Jeffrey's mother and his aunt are watching like a crime show on television, and someone's going up the stairs with a gun, and Jeffrey's coming down the stairs, and it's shot like something spooky or terrifying, but it's just our nice main character walking down the stairs. Because darkness and evil in David, this is what makes David Lynch so. One of my students one time asked, "Is this a scary movie?" And I didn't know how to answer her. It's disturbing, but it's not exactly, it's not a horror movie. But it gives you like it's disquieting. It gives you like a messed up feeling. And part of that is because David Lynch makes it seem like even our good guys are bad guys. You know, Jeffrey coming down the stairs looks like something very, he's going somewhere very scary. He's just exiting his bedroom and heading down to that house where the nice old ladies are. Um, cool. Okay. I also mentioned in terms of uh, decades. I mentioned the 1986, the earring, and the 1950s, the outfits of the high school and the car. But like the microphone that Dorothy sings into is from like the 1930s. Like it's a very, very different decades and things are being combined. Okay, cool. This is going pretty good. Um, oh, and then there's that cute. Oh, I forgot. I don't have a lot to say about this, but it's a nice little edit, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, from the bone to the ship. There's a kind of moment where he says it looks like the ear was cut off with scissors, and they immediately cut to scissors chopping open the police tape. And also, it's cute that in editing you call that a cut. And what is the thing that makes that they when the movie cuts they show scissors? It's just I don't have a lot to say about that. It's just kind of cute. Um, okay, so the crucial thing in this movie, I think, to kind of get started on the meat of it here, um, is the two women, Dorothy and Sandy. Um, One way of looking at the movie is that Jeffrey is caught in an in between space. He clearly really likes Sandy, who's like the good girl, high school girl. And he's not much older than she is, right? I mean, he was just in high school pretty recently. He just had to come back because his dad got sick. She's like the good girl, high school girl, sexually innocent. Dorothy Valens, however, is sexually mature, and he is attracted and interested in both. Um, and again, it's not 100% realistic that one it's they represent extremes. They're like extremes of sexual knowledge. That Dorothy Valens is like immersed in this very complicated world of adult sex and sexuality, and that Sandy is in this very naive sort of space. Um, and I mentioned when I was talking about Rear Window, I mentioned that there's a kind of sexual perversion to. It doesn't seem like a movie about sex at first, but Rear Window is a movie about sex. That most people remember he's got a broken leg, but doesn't have a broken leg. He's a broken pelvis and leg. So he can't have sex with Grace Kelly. And so researching this stuff about Torvald and the murder um, is a replacement for sex. The same thing is going on in this movie. Him and Sandy don't have a sexual relationship because it's implied that she's sort of a virgin. Um, and also, and of course, she's like dating somebody else, so they're not going to have sex. And so they investigate violence in the same way they do in Rear Window. But this movie draws direct attention to this when he wants to break into her apartment, Dorothy's apartment, to look around. And Sandy says, "Are you a detective or a pervert?" And he says, "That's for me to know and you to find out." He doesn't answer her question. He's both. I think he's both a detective and a pervert. But she notices the link between wanting to watch people and not be seen. Is both something detectives do and perverts do. Um, and it's a key link with him and notice, by the way, the names. His name is Jeffrey, and Jimmy Stewart's character in Rear Window is L.B. Jeffries. So there's David Lynch in his own strange way is sort of remaking the movie. Right, I'm talking about a couple of other things before we get to sort of we got to talk about the big scene in the movie, the disturbing scene between the first appearance of Frank. But before I get to that, I was talking about acting earlier. One of the other ways that characters are distinguished in this movie, this movie almost, I mentioned the feeling of different worlds, crossing barriers, the grass and the bugs, the curtain and what's behind the curtain. the fence and wild nature, right? The woods and the lumber. Um, and Jeffrey's nice house and the fucked up apartment on Lincoln Street. One of the other things that distinguishes the characters and makes them feel like they're from different worlds is that Jeffrey says things like goofy and you're a neat girl, you goofed up, nifty. Frank curses. Fuck that shit. He says several times. He curses constantly. Here's to your fuck. Um, it makes it feel like he's from a whole other universe. Because if you're reading a Hardy Boys book or if you're watching a movie from the 1950s, nobody's going to say fuck. And in this movie, nobody does say fuck, except for Frank, who's from this whole other universe. He seems like a frighteningly modern character injected into a peaceful place. It's like having a Frank in this movie is like having a serial killer show up in a cartoon. You know what I mean? Like, none of the characters are prepared for this because their world, up until now, has been a peaceful one. And Frank bursts in like some kind of total fucking maniac. Um, Okay, cool. Um, so let's start getting into the sort of scene. And actually, the first thing I want to talk about is the gas because it directly connects to what happened to Jeffrey's father. Um, Frank, when he comes in, starts he's breathing some kind of gas. Every semester I teach this movie, students want to know what's he breathing, what he's doing. They know he's doing drugs. What's he doing? Um, there is no drug that he would be doing. There's not a drug like that. I don't know what he's doing. It looks a little bit like he's doing nitrous, but nitrous is not a sex drug. And also, nitrous causes your voice to plummet. You talk like this when you do nitrous. So he doesn't do that. So it doesn't seem like it's nitrous. It doesn't really make sense that it would be nitrous. It's not anything. Because if you want to know what it is, like what drug is he doing, you're treating it like it's a realistic world. What he is doing is something strange and unusual that Jeffrey doesn't understand. Similarly, what has happened to Jeffrey's dad is something strange and unusual that Jeffrey doesn't understand. Because sometimes in this movie, Jeffrey's positioned like a small child who doesn't fully understand things. So he doesn't understand what's going on with the drugs. He doesn't understand what's going on at the hospital. I mean, literally, obviously, a college student could understand an injury to their father, but metaphorically, it's like too much for him to process. It's too much and he can't handle it. And so the movie shows it to us, the viewers, the way it feels to him. Something is confusing, something doesn't make sense. It's not realistic in that it shows you something real, but it's realistic in that it shows you how Jeffrey feels, which is overwhelmed and confused. Okay, cool. All right. So the first thing Jeffrey does is he watches Dorothy Valens undress. Which again, are you a detective or a pervert? And he's hiding in the closet looking at her. Um, Please notice that this is very similar. Rear Window features some similar kind of stuff where Jeffries is looking at his neighbors having sex and Miss Torso dancing around in very skimpy attire. He's looking at intimate details of people's lives. One of the things that he's up to, David Lynch is up to here, thinking about Hitchcock, is that Hitchcock in the 1950s, there were rules about how much sex and violence he could show. David Lynch does not have these rules. And so David Lynch is doing what Hitchcock does, except he's upping the level of sex and violence here in ways that are very surprising. But that's really a big thing that he does is Hitchcock was constrained by the rules of his decade that he couldn't do cursing, he couldn't show sex and violence, but David Lynch can. So one of the things you might think about him as doing is he's like remaking Rear Window where sex and violence are something that can be showed. And the scene between Frank and Dorothy, that first big scene between the two of them, is one of the most bonkers scenes in any movie ever, because of the intensity of the sex and violence and the weird crossover between them, and just the strangeness of it. So we will talk about that in the next video. All right, see you over there.